Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today I'm going to bring to you a couple of books that I've read in the last month-ish, probably last 2 months. I don't know. I'm just bringing you a couple of books that I've been reading, and maybe you'll find your next read too. But before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on this channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemoy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and the first Monday video of the month is reading some of those short stories to just experience the vast creativity of this community of the people that have the courage to submit, because it is kind of scary, but it is a good way to kind of get your feet wet of sharing your work publicly. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit them to the feature with the first chapter and the cover, the book will be read here on the channel at a random interval, or your chapter will be read on the channel at a random interval to hopefully help more readers find your work, because discoverability is key and it is one of the hardest things that there is. And the third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books, including the library upon request. With that said, let's jump into the story. So I got 5 different books for you today. Number 1 is The Second Son by Mike Van Hoos, which you should get, because he not only did I get this book, he also gave me this knife. So he also made this knife. It's sharp, yo. Don't mess with me. So we read this book. I have the other 2 back there as well, and I'm going to get to them at some point, so we will catch up on that. But we read this book for the loin stream because not only are you guys hilarious and fun and funny and kind and creative, but you're also very supportive. So a lot of the time, when the loin stream reads go up, if one of our own is in there, it often gets picked, and then we get to experience creativity together, group creativity, whatever. So we read The Second Son during a loin stream. I would describe the genre of this as a soft fantasy, so there aren't really super heavy fantasy world building elements, but it is in a fantasy setting. It is in a more medieval. It isn't a more medieval type of setting. It is in a more medieval type of setting. And so you're going to have a strong girl story, dystopian sort of story, because all of society sucks. Literally all of it sucks. It is dark. And I would say it kind of borderlines on misery porn or trauma porn, because it is a lot of bad things happen. So if you feel like experiencing a lot of bad things, this is for you. And I know just how many of you have a sweet tooth for torture. I've seen it. And a basic summary of this book would be Laxus Diamond is a bounty hunter with magic of the gods on her side, and we open with her on a job to pick up a hag named Wayo and then take her back to the Steel Keep. Once Laxus returns to the Steel Keep, it turns out the man who had hired her is now dead, and so she's trying to get her money from the next of kin, which is kind of now the stand-in wife, which is actually really the mistress, because the wife ran away with the child. And there is some magical shenanigans going afoot with people trying to take over the Steel Keep now that the king of the Steel Keep is dead. A little bit of incest going on, a lot of assault going on. A lot of assault. Pretty much everybody that is a man either assaults or is like, you know what, that's just part of life. It's just how it is. So it's a good thing that a lot of the girls have some kind of magical abilities. Like Laxus has a lot of power, and I feel like going forward, we're going to see her with even more power. You've got Salis, that I have to try not to say Salad. There's also a lot of death. And there is the centipede. There is a perspective from a centipede. So those are your things. Some of the things that stood out, you've got strong female characters as the, physically strong, legit physically strong female characters. There's also, the demon girl, chaos girl. She's not really a demon girl. She's just a goddess. You've got gods and goddesses going on with being basically yin and yang setups for everything. And so what can you expect from this, or what were some of my notes on this in general? Very much, I felt like a girl power storyline, because you had the guys that were basically emasculated when it came to the girls. So if you're looking for the girl power, you're going to find the girl power. The guys are also kind of all evil, including the gods, because you have that little girl that comes in. She comes in immediately, who is part of that god situation. And she's the good one out of the two. So you're going to have a lot of the girls are in the right and the girls are fighting. I mean, again, I feel like Laxus is going to make some bad decisions, but in the near future, but you know what? I mean, she made some bad decisions at the end of the book. Let's be real. She should not have brought salad with her. She should not have brought salad to a carnivore's meeting. There we go. That's what I was looking for in that joke. Lots of rape. Like I said, all of the men are terrible. And be ready for the bleakness of everything. If a book starts telling you, this book will do it too. If a book starts telling you how happy somebody is to have something and how wonderful that thing is, be prepared for that thing to be taken away from you, probably in the next chapter or two, because, well, why else would we tell you how glad they are to have that thing if it's not to just make them more miserable? There's also some things that you should prepare for is that there was a lot of head hopping in this book, so it's kind of like it'll change whose perspective you're in for making a comment if there are like 4 people in the scene. So then you'll end up having that guy's comment and then switching perspectives just to have that other guy's comment. It'll also do it per chapter. So like the centipede chapter comes in when we're looking into the background of the murder. That's all the way at the beginning of the story. So that's not a spoiler. But you get the centipede perspective because there's a time when you get like 4 different perspectives on the night of the murder. And it is set up to be that way specifically with the chapter setup. But you also just have in the scenes, it'll jump heads to tell you information that only one of the other characters would have, or to make a comment only one of the other characters would have. And so you have to be paying attention so that you can capture that. There is a repeat of information. Do not be looking forward to anybody being good because they all suck. I think there are some minor exceptions like Salad and the barn guy, the blacksmith, but good luck to you. Where the book was confusing with the switching points of view and having repeated information, it did actually have good forward momentum to the plot and it gets started out quickly. The only thing that really slowed it down was the repeating of information from other people's heads, but it does consistently move forward. And there are 2 more books in the series, so I can't tell you if it ends on a happy note or a not happy note. We will get back to that once I have more time to read. The next book that I have for you today, the next book that I want to say is The Saint Gregory by Charles Bowler. And this book came to me through the Fresh Meat features. I assume the author submitted his first chapter and his cover to be read on the channel. And I read it and I really liked the writing style and the vibe and the character. So I immediately went and bought it. And obviously, I only just got to read it recently because my backlog is so terrible. But I did get to read it, and I'm so glad that I got it because this was a book that I really, really enjoyed. I would describe the genres as a historical setting, a supernatural horror, turn of the century, old American Gothic. I don't know if I would go full supernatural because you've got some adventure. And usually I feel like to make something feel more horror is the characters are usually unable to like stave off what is happening to them. I mean, they can eventually beat it in certain ways, but it's the difference between like a supernatural action story and a supernatural horror is like things are done to them that they usually can't at least win in the beginning. So the summary of this would be a young priest named Ambrose travels to the United States to look for his missing friend, Stephen. Who went missing in a place called St. Gregory, which is in Wisconsin. It's not long after he gets to that small establishing town where a young man named Augustine is found dead in a very brutal and mysterious way. There are a lot of odd things going on in St. Gregory, but that's said about all small towns, establishing towns in America at that time. Every township has its oddities, you know, and this town is keeping its lips tight on what's going on because Ambrose is an outsider, and you don't tell your outsiders your freaking business. Especially not priests that came looking for another priest. At night, when Ambrose is at the Abbey, he hears some quarreling going on outside and decides to break the Abbey rules and investigate what's going on since no one is talking to him. Here, the father of the dead boy Augustine and the father of a girl who has supposedly been pursuing him are having a fight because Augustine's father is blaming that girl for seducing his son and getting him killed and possibly being the one to have done it. Ambrose tries to break it up, but kind of fails at that, and eventually the guy is like, stay out of my business. Nobody dies in this situation. But Augustine's dad is like, freaking stay out of my business, you. Oh yeah, Ambrose also was able to see the body at the coroner's office, and he sees some signs of things that are not really animal, but are not human. And it's very unnerving. And so he kind of gets accused of, oh, are you just here for the show? You're not actually going to help? Of course you've seen my dead son's body. Get the frick out of here. So he is not doing very well with making friends with the township. There are signs of a beast that have the stride of a man, but leave behind a massacre. There are discussions of Jezebels luring out young boys, and no one will say anything. A month later, and Ambrose's peers arrive, which you got Killian and Tobias, and they are there to help him find Stefan Valentine. He gets lost in the woods looking for answers, and after meeting a man named Silas, he also meets a monster. This isn't the end for Ambrose, though. After he fights, he is dishonored when he returns to the township and cast out of the abbey as a man who is not fit to wear the cloth. From there, the story continues, because there is a lot that happens in this book. That is not all that happens in this book. He also meets a young woman, and there are some complications that come involved with this young woman named Annalise. Now, my notes for this story, if you think I spoiled a lot, I did not. Go read it. Now, my notes for the story, the establishing of the setting for this book is done very well for me, or was done very well for me. It's got cults, it's got town secrets, it's got supernatural hauntings, it's got these things in the woods in the middle of freaking Wisconsin that is just setting itself up. The setting actually did a great job in creating that isolation, the alienation, the mystery, the loneliness, and with people not talking to this character, and just the foreign vastness of America in the 1800s. For the setting, I have this quote: "He swore he felt eyes upon him, as if shadows in the trees followed his passage, and in his mind he pictured figures with ill intent, the townsfolk, the brothers in the abbey, or the ghosts of the dead in the graveyard nearby. Laughing nervously, he rubbed his eyes. My mind is getting the better of me." For the character, I really, really liked Ambrose. Even from the start, he came off as a very nice, compassionate, thoughtful, and interesting person, and I was invested, obviously, from chapter 1. I was like, I want to see more of this guy. And then the more that I got to see him, I still liked him. Now, take that as you will. I might be a little biased because Monty has a character named Ambrose in the Western that we're doing, and so I'm already fond of the name Ambrose for personal reasons. But he came into the story with a lot of curiosity, with a lot of passion, with a desire to do right by people, right by God, and not be, you know, a problem or a mistake. And he was aware of when he was breaking the rules, and like that it would affect how people thought of him and how people thought of his friends. But he still wanted to do what was right. And in the end, he still questions his own choices. I really liked the courage that he showed and the way that he went into doing things even when he was scared, or showed courage in the face of danger and fear, and even evaluated himself on whether or not he was doing the right thing constantly. And he makes some decisions, you know, but he believes in paying for them, and he believes in following through. And so he is a very loyal, very thoughtful, and still, even when he's doubting his faith or questioning his own worth of it, he doesn't question God or blame God. And for me, when I got to the end of the story, I think it's going to be more of a story about whether, like, how he fits into that relationship with God and how he can continue to do what he's doing, and not one of turning the back on faith because of the way that the story ends. Now, there are going to be some spoilers in this discussion in general, but for the most part, Ambrose felt like a good person and a real person who was young and trying to do his duty and be sturdy in his faith, but he also was just a young man trying to deal with this thing that was kind of over his head. The way that Ambrose was written was also filled with wonder and sweetness. Quote, "I am fast upon my journey across the enormous country. After weeks in perpetual storm, I arrived in Boston 3 days past. The city is not but a fleeting memory. So little time did I spend there. In truth, I am not sad, but I left that place, famous though it is. You and Mother would have enjoyed taking in the sights and exploring exotic atmosphere. In truth, I have never seen such a mix of people. It strains belief. I should have liked to talk to them all, yet my temperament is not yours, and for however much I may yearn to know others, I yearned for the quiet places of the world even more." I also really liked that it became a group affair thing. You didn't have to wait super long for Killian and Tobias to actually come to Ambrose and to be a part of the group. And they weren't a second thought. They were actually very integral to the group. You could see the friendship between Killian, Tobias, and Ambrose, and you could see how they respected each other, how they leaned on each other, and they all brought something else to the way that the investigation went. I loved the push-pull relationship of Ambrose's interest and the longing that he felt for Annalise, but knowing that his interest and affection for Annalise was not something that he was allowed to have based on the position he held in the church. The adherence to his vows, how he fell, how his brothers were trying to help him, and the struggle between what he believed was right and what he thought he needed to do, what he should do, following his instinct, and even doing things that were technically against the church, but were for the betterment of that mystery in that township. I really liked the juxtaposition of those two things. A couple of other quotes that I want to share were, "I cannot be party to such dejection and nihilism. Men need hope and faith in dark times. Marx, for all of his good intentions, said, religion is the opiate of the masses. He was wrong. It is despair. Despair is the opiate of the masses. There is no force like nihilism to give free rein to the intoxication of men's basest impulses." Quote, "Evil circles like carrion buzzards, circling both living and dead. But you forgot a truth, or never knew it. Evil is not created. No dark arts bring it into being. It doesn't spoil or corrupt, it only follows. It follows what is already corrupted." Quote, "Fear lets the devil in a lot easier than a little laissez-faire free-spiritedness." There were a lot of good quotes and a lot of great interactions, and the way that the setting was created make me really look forward to whatever Charles does next for the story, because this is just a book one in the series, so, I'm following it for that. I really liked the way that the book ended, which I talked about in my favorite moments video that I did, and I also really liked the final scene between Ambrose and Annalise. I thought their relationship was handled very well. I also liked the time when he was having kind of his crisis of faith, of self, of what was going on, and he went to Annalise, and he was drunk, and what happened, and the morning after what happened, it was all handled really well. It was so sweet, and just good. I trust Charles with this, and I'm looking forward to the next one. The one thing that you should also know about this book is that if copy editing errors bother you, be prepared for that, because I do think that this book could use another copy edit. There started to be more and more like small typos throughout the work. Things like said John Emil said, and what is digging up these graves anyway? So it's like a lot of these little small things that are super easy to fix that are pretty much, I don't care about them. But if it's something that bothers you, there is that. But the story and the characters and the setting and the writing, all great. Copy editing, honestly, is the easiest thing possible to fix, so you can fix bad copy edits on a bad story, and it's still gonna be a bad story. If you got copy edits on a good story, bruh, you are above the rest. And the next story that I have for you was Redwater Dreams by R.A. Morley. This is the second book in the lyrical book series. I read the first book and talked about it previously. That book was called Let There Be Fire. I would describe the genre of this as being a low fantasy, more D&D style, maybe dungeon crawler. Would I call it dark? I don't think I would call it dark. It has sophomoric humor, so it's actually pretty light. And yeah, this book starts out with Cal floating in the water with his crew as they were traveling, picking up immediately after the end of book one. In a vision/dream state, he's visited by a goddess who offers to help him if he'll do her bidding, and he agrees. He wakes up and they're saved by what is basically a pirate ship, and on this ship it's not too long before one of the humans corners Cal and pretty much tries to force himself on him, saying that Cal is below him as a dark elf. Somehow, Cal is now become very passive as opposed to how he was in the previous book. Instead of being arrogant or strong, he kind of is just taking it. And he's lost his ability to use fire or whatever else because he's just letting this guy push him around, grab him by the hair, and victimize him. He doesn't even try to fight it off. I get that. I took the feeling from this that he owed it to that guy, since that guy was part of the crew that saved him, and or he was drunk/drugged, because drugs are mentioned later. But it all felt really convenient, and it felt kind of out of character. Like, I've got some problems with some of the characters in this. It also almost felt somewhat fetishy with writing a character to just be pushed around in this situation when he was not pushed around in this type of situation previously. But maybe I've been burned by a couple too many books that try to insert fetishization into the second book in the series where it wasn't into the first book. I accept that. But for this, he wasn't even sassy like he normally is. And he's always dropping sexual comments on other people. And then there are just certain things about him. I'll get into them with the comments. Apparently, Cal is also the only one. So later, as this is happening, then his captain shows up and is like, hey, what are you doing? And threatens that guy. And then everybody gets called into the order of the group. And then everybody kind of gets called in, so that kind of gets broken up. And that lady informs Cal that they all knew that the drinks were drugged except for him, and they didn't tell him. And the lady was like, well, we didn't tell you because I'm psychic, and I knew that you were going to be fine. So also, one of the issues I have with that specific thing, because I've been reading a different book that did the same thing where it's like, well, I can see the future and I see that you're fine, so I didn't do anything. That tells me a bigger context in your story, which is that the future is stagnant, that no matter what you do, the future is going to happen. Everything is set in stone. Nothing that you do will change it, because her seeing that he was fine in the future told her that nothing was going to happen, so then she didn't take action. So that means that either she was lucky or the future is always going to be the same. And so what she sees, no matter what her actions are now, no matter what anybody's actions are now, is that you cannot change things. So then, like, what is the point of any of them doing anything? It's all going to just turn out for the best, or there's no such thing as free will in this story. Like, that's the bigger implication of saying and doing something like that, and I just don't like it. So they find out that the ship, or rather, the ship belongs to a bunch of slave traders, and after beating up the slavers, they look around the ship, and in the medical area, they find some dark magic bad things like genies in a bottle, a head of some weirdo creature, and a bottled shadow, like all bad things. But instead of continuing to go through that cabinet, they just close it after finding 3 bad things. Cal, however, is the only one that goes back down into the medical ward to continue going through that cabinet, and there he finds a shelf of a bunch of magical pixies, elemental pixies, and decides to release them. Because nobody else, despite having found creatures down there like the freaking genie and the bottled shadow, they didn't keep looking to go, hey, maybe there was more stuff. I should put this knife down. Maybe there was more stuff in there that we should have looked for. No, it's just Cal. So he takes those pixies back up to the top, to the deck, and then releases them, and they like him. And the one fire pixie especially likes him and wants to help him. Of course, none of the pixies are like freaking silly. But Cal wants to leave the ship to go and do the thing that he has to do for the goddess that contacted him. And so he goes to his captain, Talia, and says, hey, I'm going to go chase after, Avi's child and continue on my mission. And Talia is that okay with you, Talia? And Talia is like, well, I will release you if you sleep with me. She doesn't say it in those words. She's like, take off your clothes. And basically that's it. That, coercion. He doesn't want to do it. He sighs as he's taking off his clothing. And then again, the series starts out with him talking about how he sexually harassed a guard and that's why he was in prison. And now we're dealing with book 2 that starts out with him being sexually harassed twice in the first quarter of it. So it's kind of an awkward switch. Anyway, that's as far as I will take that story. He goes on to the mission to save the child with his group, to save Avi's son with the group. And they do find the child, and that's kind of the climactic moment. They run into a bunch of other new people. So yeah, some of my notes for this include, so there was more lazy writing in this book in the forms of, quote, the 2 little fairy creatures babbled too far for Cal to hear, using dramatic body language to convey their meaning. The lightning sprite raised its squeaky voice, displeased, more banter ensued, with most of the crew watching while Kelso tried to pry his hands from his neck unassisted. Another area where there was lazy writing was that it would suddenly throw something at you as if the author had just come up with something and then was coming up with a reason for why it was never mentioned before, which includes, I have genie blood in me, so I sensed a genie was near. Oh, I saw that nothing was going to happen. I had a vision, so I knew that nothing was going to happen to you, so I knew I didn't need to tell you anything. So then you're fabricating the tension in this and then making a reason as to why you left your character in the dark in the end to try to make the reader think that the character was ever in danger or to write a scene. It just... More lazy writing includes character picked up on nuanced conversations. Sometimes it felt like just recapping what everyone in that scene was doing. so that they aren't forgotten, and it felt distracting and pointless and meandering in a way. There were times when it felt like coincidentally abilities just stopped working so that they would have to rely on Val. It's like, oh, well, yeah, that would normally work, but right now the water is actually 70 degrees instead of 75 degrees, so I can't actually teleport us. It was stuff that was that convenient. It was a lot of things like this, also with a lot of characters introduced all at once. Like, you would kind of go to different areas, and then it's like, here's 8 to 15 characters. Maybe not 15, but it was a lot of characters constantly introduced. And then in any scene where there were a lot of people, it would also kind of circle around what everybody was doing. So it kind of felt like this came from a role play or a D&D game. So it'd be like, Kelso opened the drawer and started cooking. Cal sniffed the cooking and smiled. Dexter rubbed his hands together, waiting angrily for the food. So-and-so drooled because it smelled so good already. And so it would just kind of circle around everybody in a lot of different scenes, and it would slow it down instead of allowing the focus to remain on a character. So then that kind of made it feel like a D&D or roleplay thing. Also, there was this assumption, it never established the place or the setting or the rules for anything. It would just kind of throw stuff at you, and that includes the characters. So there was like no character introduction for most of the characters. You were just sort of assumed to know their races, to know what they are, who they were, what their relationships were, like the information would come from somewhere else. And I just never got what I needed in the story to make it feel like it was a lived-in place. That includes all of the gods, or a lot of the gods that are mentioned, were all Greek references. Like Persephone is one of the creatures, one of the gods that Cal ends up doing business for. But we're in a universe where Greeks don't exist. And it can work that you have and you're using Greek names for your gods, but you kind of have to explain it in that storyline of how it works or where they come from or something. But instead, it was another thing where the characters just sort of assumed, like, you're familiar with this thing, and then it threw it out, and then it was just there. And as far as I am aware, with it being a place that is completely made up with dark elves and all of the, spectrum of creative characters, of creative races, throwing in Hades and Persephone and all of these other Greek gods without any basis for how they exist in a world where Greece doesn't exist, didn't make any sense. I also had a very hard time believing how often Cal was considered the weakest link of the group here, and how people kept taking advantage of him, when in the first book he was the strongest character, and then in this book he's not only described constantly or dismissed constantly as the weakest link and the one to be abused and the one to just not take seriously, but they also turn to him constantly to be the one to solve their problem. Like, if they're in a dangerous situation, oh, Cal, can you do this? And then he also has, a number of times where he uses his super mega awesome fire powers to get them out of a situation. So is he the one that they can rely on, or is he the biggest victim? It kind of jumps between the two depending on how it wants you, the reader, to feel about him at any given time. I also felt like there were too many characters to the point that I couldn't care about any of them. But that's a big cast issue, and it's very difficult to manage a big cast. It's also very hard to get me to care about a big cast. Throughout the book, Cal also felt like a completely different person. The one Seaman came up to him, and the guy is a human, and Cal acts coy and weak, like he doesn't know what that guy is there to try to do. And it didn't make any sense to me. It didn't matter that Cal was supposed to be a different person in this. I mean, that he acted not consistently. I still didn't like him. He pretends to be selfless for points, but then he doesn't actually show that through narration. It's still just, and it likes to victimize him for no reason. Go back to the goddess deal that puts him into servitude. He says that it's for other people, and then shortly thereafter he feels the need in his narration to say this. Seal shook her head. I've never met a genie, but I've also never heard of a benevolent one. People like me aren't created out of love and respect. That's why we make popular outcasts among Murnig. Half-elves as well, thought Cal, though he refrained from saying as much given his present company. Like, does he need to be thinking about, like, me too? I don't know. It felt, like, inappropriate at times to just, yeah, sure, okay, you're one too, and you just gotta remind the reader. Cal caring about the random child is so obscure and forced that even the characters in this story don't really get it. Like, the whole thing goes, oh, well, Cal cares about this child because he was adopted and he could have been in a terrible situation, and his dad stopped him from being in a terrible situation, so he is wholesome and cares about this. But nobody in the story believes that. Like, he needed to show this kind of care when introduced, because Cal in book 2 doesn't feel like the same as Cal in book 1 from the start, and the characters are recognizing that when they say, you never cared about anything like this before. Why now? So are you telling me that Cal, who is saying that this is intrinsic to his character to care about children because he was cared about, that none of his friends or any of his associates who know him are like, oh yeah, you save kids all the time because you care about kids. They're all looking at this situation going, why are you doing this now? You never cared so much about this before. That's weird to me. And it makes the whole situation feel forced in his care for kids, because you don't see it in any other situation. And his pals know that. Speaking of characters not caring, reflecting on the whole Talia situation where she saw him being abused and then just didn't say anything in the vision, I guess it's because she just doesn't care, considering she coerced him into sex within 24 hours after that situation. So she apparently just doesn't care and everybody sucks. And so then she just used that reason of his to take advantage of him. Early on in the book, it also felt like all of the women in this appeared controlling, victimizing of Cal specifically. When you get into Hebe, it didn't feel like Hebe was just doing her own thing, but the early women in this were all definitely victimizing. There was still a lot of dialogue to me that felt immature or very sophomoric. Things like, I have something that can help you. You only mention that now? It's not easy being sexier than I already am on a daily basis. Like, I get what it's trying to do. It just didn't hit for me. And you've got stuff in the actual writing that reads, he said something crude and then laughed at his own joke. It just reads like he's a loser. And then you got stuff in the writing where it's like, he said something crude and then he laughed at his own joke. You can make that work for somebody that's being suave, but in general, with the way that it just read like he was a loser, and I might be a little salty because I was told that this was wholesome, and I'm just like, I don't see it. I'm sorry, I don't see it. But it is a very specific anime-style character that is trying to be both suave and wholesome and badass. And it just didn't come across for me. But I think the biggest thing that it was lacking for me was like a solidarity that felt like that world was lived in. It didn't take time to create its own setting, to introduce you to the characters, to pull you into the characters. It just like swings into it, and you're just supposed to follow with how fast-paced everything goes with 1.5 million characters, and it just didn't work for me. The next story I have for you is Cartoons in the Suicide Forest by Lisa Contoril. The genres are literary fiction, bizarro, acid trip, feels like a trauma journal, and you should probably seek help. Oh no. So this is a collection of a couple of stories ranging from a woman going into the forest to commit suicide, who she then becomes a cartoon and sees an orgy of creatures sucking on the excretions of the cartoon queen and rubs it in all of her orifices. If you're thinking it, yes. She murders that lady to set free all of the sad girls that had joined the sad girl cartoon cult and feed on the queen, but then she becomes the queen herself, and now they will all worship her. You also got a Beauty and the Beast story where the captive jumps out the window to kill herself but ends up in a body cast and gets raped to death. There's a random story about a couple of Russian lesbians who get married, and it creates an uproar in Russia, so the Russians hunt them down in a cabin in the woods, kill one of them, rape the other one, and then a bunch of feral cats that the women had been collecting over time while they stayed in that cabin. Yeah, the feral cats murder and eat the Russian soldier. Then there's a fortune teller doll that was offered a deal by a strange man who could turn her into a star, and he actually just turned her into a sex doll who is now the main object on a porno set. It becomes possessed, and the men having a scene with it get stuck inside of it, and the place catches on fire and everybody dies. Then a bunch of spiders have a spider orgy inside of this plastic doll and lay a bunch of spider eggs, and then the spiders basically reanimate her from the inside, and she wakes up, and now she is a sentient moving doll on her own, and she has this web coming out of her places. You know the places, the porno places. And it tastes sweet like cotton candy, and so then she eats it and touches herself, and then goes to an old... the place where her fortune teller booth was, and then opens up a booth to sell that stuff to people and gets them addicted to it, and then the carnival shuts down, but she stays there in this carnival wasteland selling her cotton candy to these addicts. Yeah. that's where we are. Then we got a take on the Little Mermaid, where this mermaid goes to the surface to get legs, and she's assaulted by and she sees the sea witch, who says that if she can get eggs from a human, then she can become a human. And so then but also you got to worry about the humans, because humans like to eat mermaid meat. So she like gets to the surface, and the first human she sees just takes a huge bite out of her tail, and then rapes her mouth, and then she immediately lays fish eggs, and he starts eating the fish eggs, and then the fish eggs turn into, like, they hatch. And then the sea witch comes up, and she's like, oh, good, you got the eggs. And so then she takes the eggs, and then it turns the mermaid into a human, and then the mermaid, now human. So then the mermaid turned human starts wandering the beach and finds a spaceship, and then gets into the spaceship. It's an abandoned spaceship, and then sets the flight plan to Earth, which is 97% water, and she believes that there is hope there. You've also got a couple other random stories, one that feels like an actual drug trip diary a little bit. And how did I come across this book? Well, in 2018, when I was at AWP, I purchased a copy of this book from the Clash Books booth after talking to them about, wanting something interesting, something different, something funny. And I bought this book along with 2 other books. Earlier this week or last week, it was one of the 2, we were talking about stuff. I went down memory lane. I went to my old blog. I looked at the blog post for this, and then I was like, you know what? I never got to share this trip with anybody. I wrote a blog 5 years ago. That blog is now gone. Like, the blog is private because I just don't use it anymore. And now there was nowhere else to share this with. So I shared it with the chat, and I re-experienced it, and I understood again why I said I felt like this person needed help when I read this book. Yeah, it's only 112 pages, so it wasn't that long, and now I'm not the only person who knows that it exists. And that was the big thing for me, is I needed to share those experiences with somebody else, because sometimes, you experience some crazy things like a spider orgy that create a cotton candy coochie, and you need to share it, because you're like, moving on. The last book, what a follow-up to that. The last book to share with you today is The Origin of the Sky by Chelsea Harrington. I would consider this book's genre to be folklore, fantasy. I mean, I don't know if there's much more than that. It is folklore. It is absolutely folklore. It is beautiful. It starts out with a man coming into the woods and leaving a bundled up baby on a frozen lake. That lake is concerned that if no one comes to take care of that crying baby, it's the middle of winter, that baby is going to die. So the mountain nearby that overlooks the lake tells the lake that if it wishes hard enough, it can become a human being, and then it can pick up that baby and go off and take care of it. So the lake, wanting to take care of that child, becomes a human, and when he wakes up as a human, he also sees the mountain has done the same thing, and the mountain is there beside him. So him and the mountain pick up the baby, and then the mountain says that she knows of a place over there from when she was a peak, when she had a peak. She knows of a cabin where they can go and wait out the winter and take care of each other, so then that's where they go. While they're at the cabin, they, give each other names, because they all need to have actual names, so they're not just the lake and the mountain and this baby. And so the mountain names herself Adira, she names the lake Bo, and then the Bo names the child Theodore. Those names will all come up later in a story that they all tell each other, because this book is a mixture of watching this family kind of grow together and travel this abandoned dead world where everything just seems dead and over with. There are no people, it's abandoned, and they relay stories of, I'm getting the chills again talking about it. And they relay stories of the history and the past and the mythology of this place as they go from place to place, because Adira and Bo have been alive for so long that they know the history of this stuff. And it does actually come in to have meaning with the whole rest of the story. Like, I think that this book was a work of art in a lot of ways. But we'll get into that because I'm still talking about this synopsis. So they're sitting in the log cabin, or they're sitting in the cabin waiting out the winter, when Bo asks what they should do now that they're human. And Adira says that she wants to, look around now that they can move, now that they can travel. I should put another knife down again, I'm sorry. And Adira says that she wants to move, she wants to travel. And so Bo says, where should we go? And Adira says, anywhere, everywhere. I don't care. I just want to see what we can see. She sighed and crawled over, leaning against the wall. Wherever you want to go, I will be happy to go as well, just as long as we see something new. Her gaze traveled up the sunken rocks of the roof, studying their textured bends. Bo frowned and looked away too, back up the stairs, falling silent. He wrapped the blanket around his legs and leaned back, feeling tired. He didn't want to leave. This is one place, Adira. There is one place, Adira. One place that I want to go. I don't even know if it really exists, but if it does, well, it seems like it must be the most special place in the world. He rubbed his arms and looked over at her. She was relaxed, but attentive. I have heard that there is this place where the sky touches the earth. No, that isn't even it. More than that, it is the origin of the sky. It is the place where the stars spiral from and converge again. It is at the end of everything and the birthplace as well. That is where I want to go. The crackle of the little fire was the only noise in the room as she nodded, thinking this over. She felt the pattern of her clothes, their ridges dripping down her resting legs, finally placing her hand over his, following the gentle slope to his wrist. I know of this place. It is beyond my vision, or beyond what used to be my vision. But I know the way. I think it's dangerous, sacred. I don't know if we will make it all the way. When he looked down, disappointed, she lifted his chin with her extended hand. I don't know if it's possible to go, but we may as well try, Bo. When we feel ready, perhaps as the cold recedes, we'll go and try to see the origin of the sky. And so then once spring comes, they travel, and the story kind of covers, I think, about 20 years as it goes. It's a short story, so it's like every time you switch between mythology and getting back with the mountain and the lake, they've aged a little bit, and it tells you how they've aged, and I think it's very masterfully done. So it did a great job with setting the scene and setting the expectation. If you listen to or read that first chapter and you like the way that it feels, then you'll like the rest of the book, at least how it's written, because it's all going to be written in that same style, and you're going to have a very good idea of what to expect. This was another book that came to me through the Fresh Meat feature, where the author submitted the book. The first chapter I read here, and then I read it, I looked at the cover, and I was like, I want to read the rest of this book. Not only is the book very mystical, but there is art at the front of each of the chapters that is drawn by the author, and the cover is also drawn by the author. And really, I think that this book was so much of a work of art in a lot of different ways, from the way that it was put together to the style of the folklore, and the visuals within the book are so cool. I love the author's style of art in this book. I loved the personification of the mountain and the lake. On the first read that I had, where I read it for the Fresh Meat feature, I was like, dude, I am so into this, and I like the way that the characters also had representations of like where they had come from. Like the mountain was still described in a very mountainous way, and she was taller than the lake, and the lake had hair that was described to go with the water. As the mountain and the lake traveled around, there was such a sense of wonderment and exploration of the world. There was also such a sense of joy and interest, like as much as you can when it's the end of the world, because it felt like there was also this under feeling of they knew what had happened to the world, which I also wouldn't be surprised, since Bo sort of intimates that they have gone through this before, but as a mountain and a lake, they've seen the extinction of people before, but they don't really talk about it that way. But there is such a sense of exploration and wonderment as they go from place to place. The parables, smaller stories mixed between the travels, also make this world feel very old and very lived in, whereas, where one of the other stories that I mentioned today did not have a grounding where it felt like real and lived in. This book felt lived in. This felt like a world that existed to somebody, and like people actually lived there, and there was a history to that world, and this book was passing on the history of that world. It is magical realism is a good way to describe this book too. My two favorite parables from this story had to be Joseph and the Cloud Maker, and I really liked the idea of Joseph being so lonely that he was just building all of these towers because he didn't know what to do with his time, and then two, he was hoping that somebody would see them and come find him, because I've had a very similar, maybe this is a little too closer, that's why I liked it, but I know that I've had things that I'm like, you know what, I don't know what to do, I don't know how to talk to people, I don't know how to find people, so I'm just gonna start building stuff, and maybe they will come if I'm just like, here's the thing. And you know what? It's kind of worked. I have met a lot of incredible people through this YouTube channel, which I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna build what I find fun or interesting and see if anybody actually wants to hang out. And surprise, surprise, I'm finding cool books now, and I'm meeting a lot of incredible people, and I really appreciate it. So you know what? I get it. I get it, Joseph. I just hope my story doesn't quite end like yours. This also, despite saying that, this book, for me, it felt like a book of love. Every story in this book and every chapter between the lake and the mountain had love between them. And they were so into also being a family for and with Theodore. But it's a book of hope as well. Quote, "It's possible, little one, but the story isn't really that upsetting or sad when you think about it. Life is strange, and we find a way to push through even the worst situations. Abduction, violence, even death. The creature is by no means the hero of the story or an individual that we should ever hope to meet. But if it's true that he managed to live, doesn't that make you feel like you can do anything as well? It makes me think that nothing is ever truly lost, or no obstacle too much to overcome." This book was so much about love, and was so much about hope, and there was another thing about this book that made me think of myself, okay? And that's not saying anything, but I think that in this I found something that spoke to me on a personal level because of the, like, I know that I'm not the only person that thinks this, okay? So it just means that I found somebody else, and I'm sure that I found other people that say the exact same thing. But it's funny because about a month or two ago, I wrote an essay that had to do with this specific idea, and I'll read you the quote and then maybe talk about it a little bit more. Quote, "He thought of the old photos. Maybe his ancestors' elements would have been able to tell him their tale. They knew so many stories of so many people. He still liked hearing them. They made him feel connected. Through the stories, he could touch them, not just sympathize, but truly connect with them. They were out there still, in the stories, and he knew it, like hearing someone shift in their sleep in the dark. They were there. He couldn't see them, but he heard their words, their sleep-addled sounds, and felt their warmth so close to him. He looked out across the waters with eyes of stars and watched the world move before them." So in an essay that I wrote a little while ago, I actually described how important storytelling was to me and how much I appreciated storytelling, because it's a way of passing on your life, your experience, your time period, your geography, your culture, your thoughts, whatever, to somebody that, one, you may never talk to because you're in different places or you just are never going to know each other for a multitude of reasons. Or it's like time traveling. If I read something from the 1800s, if I read something from the 1400s, I know how personal my writing is to me, and the things that I reflect in my writing, be it the background that I have, the way that I view the world, I'm passing on the experiences that I have, the hope that I have, the lack thereof, whatever. I'm passing that on through the works that I do. And so in picking up somebody else's book, I'm experiencing what they found important enough, what they found inspiring enough to pass on to other people, to see the world that they saw. Be it in the characters and the themes and the year and the more realistic, less realistic, more fantasy, less fantasy. You're still passing on that folklore, that history. You're having a conversation outside of time, outside of place. And it's so incredible to me what art does for people and for connection of people. Call me stupid and silly as much as you want, but there is a reason that I see it as so much more than a commercial process, and why I personally think that the heavy commercialization of any of the arts, like, they need to happen and they're going to happen, but that's not all they are. And so for me, the commercialization and just the produce garbage is kind of an insult because of what art really is, what storytelling really is in all of its forms. But then there are things that look like storytelling that are not storytelling because they're just product-like storytelling. Anyway, that gets into a whole nother thing, but I felt like I saw that with this, and that's what this book also felt like. I am going to close with the ending of The Origin of the Sky. I think that you're going to need to read the book to really get to the sense of it, but this book did make me cry. I was crying last December too. At least it's not like 40 degrees in here. But the ending of this did make me cry. I feel like that's important to say. If the author ever sees this, so that they can know their efforts, like how much, to know that their efforts were worth it, or that they had so much meaning. Regardless, it's just a rando saying something. But I thought the story was meaningful. The final quote that I wanted to share from this book is, "Theodore left as the starlight soaked in, bringing in everything, leaving now for a world that he would have to make himself, a world that he would bring alive in the absence of what had come before, with the memories of what had come before. He was made of stars. He was made of more than that even. He was made of mortal love and primal voices that spoke so softly few heard them, but would answer eagerly nonetheless. For within him he held everything, and he was beginning to dream. He was beginning to dream a wild new dream that would not only become his, but that of his family, and those who would follow, and all of the people who would come after. He had been born of the sky, and the last of the now dead, and raised by the elements themselves, water and earth together to make life. He loved them, and he could see them still. You could see them all so vividly still. The ground around him would break with new, and bring forth new love, new stories, and this will not be the end. I am with you. Very enjoyable. A book that I'm obviously going to have to get in physical form because it's great. But see, I can read stories that I enjoy. I can have a good time. I can enjoy books again. Sometimes it just depends, but I can find them. And there are great stories being written and being told. These were just 5 more contemporary ones, though obviously some of them are older than others. Some of them fit my tastes more than others, but there are 5 books to check out if they tickle your pickle of interest. With that said, thank you so much for watching. I will be, obviously, I've got a bunch more books to be looking at that I hope to be looking at soon. You know, a handful right up front that have been calling for me for a month now, so we're gonna get into them. I promise they are coming. There are more books coming from all sorts of places, and I don't know if this gives anybody hope for the Fresh Meat feature, but at least I do evaluate everything that goes in there. And I mean, at least I buy stuff. So thank you so much to everybody who submits to the Fresh Meat feature and shares your ideas, just so that even I can see them, okay? And then they can just share it and hopefully find their audience. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you'll check out any of these great authors down in the comments below. Have a great week, have a great weekend, and Merry Christmas. Don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out?
The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him.
Cross isn't a killer.
For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die.
Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Why? Did you do that?
To the left, plain black letters read along the wall, "You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark" is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me.
Where the hell am I?
You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?